I'm Eileen Serlin, and I teach at Saybrook Institute, and I'm here today with Dr. Laura Perls to have a conversation really about the history of Gestalt therapy. And I'd like to begin with some questions. Laura. We've talked, and I worked with you for 3 years here and then worked at the Gestalt Institute with you. And you told me many stories really about how you began with Gestalt, first from Frankfurt, and how all that got started, and then how it came here to this country. Could I ask you to say some of that?
Well, actually, when I started studying in Frankfurt, I started with law and economics and became aware when I took a course in forensic medicine that I was much more interested, or really only interested, in the psychological aspects and not at all in law per se, and so I switched. And I got immediately into Gestalt psychology.
With whom in Frankfurt?
With Ademar Gelb. And Gelb at the time was lecturing in psychology and was also doing a lot of collaborative work with Kurt Goldstein, who had at the time the Institute for Brain-Injured Veterans from the First War.
In Frankfurt?
In Frankfurt. And that is where I met Fritz, who was at the time an assistant of Goldstein's.
Yes. And the laboratory assistant, you said?
In the Neurological Institute.
Yes. It wasn't called Gestalt then. Goldstein called it, what did he call his theory at that time?
Well, organismic.
Self-regulation?
No, the self-regulation that came in through Reich. That was later.
Yeah.
And Fritz was working with Reich in Berlin.
So at the
but
time...
my analysis was with Karl Landauer in Frankfurt, who was one of the original Freud disciples.
Yes.
But who was killed by the Nazis. He was already in Holland, and we met him there still in '33. But he stayed there, and he was working already, and he was caught there.
How did you go from psychoanalysis, and you had some training in that, to Goldstein and Gestalt?
Well, when I met Fritz, he was at the time still in analysis and already doing analysis. And I got into analysis myself, actually more in order to be in with Fritz and a friend of his who was also in analysis, and talked a kind of jargon and were wildly analyzing everybody around, including me. And
what did you think of it at the time, the analysis?
Well, I fell in love with Fritz, and anything he did and said was okay. But it was also enormously interesting. It was not an entirely new field for me. I had read some Freud already, and I had been for a few months in a so-called sanitarium when I had what they called a nervous breakdown, which was simply a reaction to a friendship with a young man being interfered with by my father, and the usual.
Me too.
So I was in Freudenstadt in the sanitarium. Dr. Bauer, who was an individual psychologist, an Adlerian, But somehow it was then in the air, and I was 16 at the time, and I read the interpretation of dreams and the Fehlhandlungen. What is the English title?
I don't know the German.
It doesn't matter.
Did you meet any of them? Adler, Reich, Freud,
Later
Jung, Laban?
I didn't meet Freud, I met Anna.
Ah,
And of course I was in the Frankfurt Institute. I had
of psychoanalysis. This is
yeah, while I was doing my doctoral dissertation, I was also in analysis. And my first teacher was Frieda vom Reichmann. Landauer was my analyst. They started the Frankfurt Institute. And the locality was the Sociological Institute that was at the time already Horkheimer and Adorno, who were all in analysis with
were they?
with Landauer. We always met in the waiting room, one after the other.
Well, how did those two different things come together? Individual psychoanalysis and sociological, what later became Gestalt, group fields.
Getting into analysis and really expanding analytical attitudes into their sociological approach. That was the Frankfurt School then.
Yeah, yeah. Was it compatible?
At the time, it wasn't really. I got into a real, very confused state. I always describe it as, like Pavlov's double-conditioned dogs who go to sleep in the middle of the experiment. I just got paralyzed completely and on strike for a while. I didn't do anything. I got stuck with my dissertation. And I got married before I had finished it, and left it for a while, but then I went back and I finished. I got my doctorate in 1932. It was just a few months before we had to leave.
Very different things to sort out at that time. And find your own direction.
It just was like that, and one did it and went through it. There was nothing else one could do.
Well, your direction was largely determined by the war then, too.
Yeah.
You had to leave.
We had to leave. We went to Holland first, where we couldn't stay because we didn't get a working permit. And that's how we got to South Africa. It was through Ernest Jones, who had an inquiry from South Africa for somebody to teach.
I didn't know that. Did Fritz teach, or did you both teach?
Well, we started an institute there, actually. And we were both teaching. That was later on revoked, because I said only somebody who had been a teacher already or a training analyst in Europe could be teaching outside, and so we had to stop the institute, but we had so much practice, we just went on. I never worked as hard in my life as I worked there, particularly during the war. Fritz was in the army as an army psychiatrist, and everything came on me. I was working 10 and 12 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Seeing patients.
And sometimes on Sundays too, because people were doing war work during the week and came on the weekend. I remember when I came at 8 o'clock in the evening in the kitchen, I said to the maid, I'm absolutely finished. And she said, what do? You sit and talk.
Mm.
That was no work for her.
She was honest with you. Was it more like psychoanalysis what you did then?
Oh, what we did
At
then
that
was
point?
straight
And you
psychoanalysis. And it was only gradually
No.
somehow finding in the course of the years that it remained unsatisfactory and disappointing to a great extent. People knew more and more and changed very little, if
Yes.
at all.
Yes. This fascinated me. I thought that
And then
Gestalt could...
I fell back on things which I had done all my life, which is a lot of body work. And also sat opposite my client.
I remembered, I was going to say in the introduction that I met you because I was doing dance therapy.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find anybody who could bring together verbal and nonverbal.
Hmm.
And I'd spent so much time going to a verbal therapist to talk about what went on in the movement. And I finally went to somebody who said, who in New York City can that come together in one place? And they sent me to you. And you talked about eurythmics that
Yeah.
you did, was it?
Yeah,
that
and
in
modern
Germany?
dance, which I did already since I was very young. And all my life. I still do some exercises.
Yeah.
There's a lot I can't do anymore, but it keeps me going.
You just hike in the Alps
Oh, yeah.
every summer.
I walk here too every day. Last summer I was still walking about 3 hours every day.
And breathe. So then you began to bring body work into the work. It didn't happen in Frankfurt, it happened later. I thought it was while you were in Frankfurt still.
No, there it was
Ah.
kind of separate. I did it all the time, and my analyst wasn't so pleased with it because he felt we never knew really what any change was due to, and I think it was due just to the combination.
Yeah,
I wouldn't have gotten where I got without the one or the other.
yeah.
He was also not such a fanatically strict analyst like Melanie Klein or some others, or most of them still at the time. He was actually more friendly with Ferenczi and Grodek.
Oh,
And Ferenczi and Grodek were great friends. And Reich came from Ferenczi.
yeah. But there was no theory yet then of the body with analysis. Reich didn't have his theory yet then, did he?
Reich
You-
was developing his character analysis at the time.
At that time. But you didn't go that
And the
direction.
character. I didn't work with
Gestalt.
Reich. Fritz was at the time working with Reich.
Mm-hmm.
And for me that was to a great extent already a matter of course, because through the body work that I had done before.
You had already done a lot of that.
Oh yes, I did it since I was 8 years old.
When I think of you, I think more of dance and the arts than
Oh,
Reich
yeah.
and body work and
Yeah.
analytic body work.
Yeah.
Would you say your background is more from the arts
Yeah,
and your way of looking
entirely.
at... Yeah.
From actual Eurythmics and modern dance.
Yeah. And piano.
Of course. Yeah, and the first body work I did, apart from the school exercises, it was an Dalkreuz work, which was mostly
That's
with music. But it was only a short while when I was about 8, and when I was 9 the war broke out and the teacher was drafted.
So I still don't know how Gestalt. I know when you came here in '52, the institute
We
was
still
formed.
called ourselves
still-
psychoanalysts at the time.
Oh, you did.
Yeah, I still have stationery with our names on it, psychoanalysts.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Even in
And
'52.
ego, hunger and aggression was called a revision of Freudian analysis.
Wasn't called Gestalt then?
No, no.
When
Yeah.
Paul Goodman got involved, it was still called psychoanalysis? Back then? Revision?
Actually, Fritz and Paul, they wanted to call it Gestalt therapy.
Mhm.
And I was actually against it because I knew that the Gestalt psychologists probably would reject that, which they did. But I was outvoted. I thought at the time of existential therapy. That title didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
That came also a little later.
Did you feel you were in that tradition? Would be Binswanger and Boss, existential?
Well,
see
actually, I
yourself
was a student of Paul Tillich and Martin Buber, and of course we had studied phenomenology and existentialism. We were reading Kierkegaard and later Heidegger, Scheler and Husserl. Actually, Max Scheler was teaching in Cologne, I think, and was supposed to become the ordinarius for philosophy in Frankfurt. And he had done his introductory presentation already, and then he died.
Mm.
And then Paul Tillich came in his place. And I did most of my philosophical work with Paul Tillich.
Mm.
But before that, I had been with Martin Buber already.
Mm.
He was teaching in Frankfurt
Mm.
at the time too.
Mm.
And
What
he
was
had
that
just
like?
written I and Thou.
Really? Huh. What was he like?
Wonderful. Healthy, straightforward. And you felt that he was talking to you.
Mm.
You felt directly addressed and not talked at, like most lecturers do. And the same was with Paul Tillich.
Mm.
And of course they were both theologians.
Well, except I was going to say, if being Jewish then, that's very different. Paul Tillich is not. If Martin Buber then influenced your thinking or your, since it's your
Tillich
tradition.
was influenced by Martin Buber too.
Yeah.
And at that time already it wasn't a question anymore at all of belonging to a definite religious organization.
Mm. You use the word so often about making contact. I was thinking about I and thou.
Well, that was something that wasn't part of psychoanalysis at all.
Especially if you sit behind your patient.
You sit behind the patient, and Freud invented this ritual because he, as he said himself, he couldn't stand people staring at him. So he could avoid his own embarrassment, but also the embarrassment of the client. The client talks to the wall, or to himself, or to nobody.
And it occurred to you that embarrassment was important and useful in therapy.
And embarrassment is has become for me a creative state.
Mm.
It is the boundary state par excellence. Here you are with one foot in what you know and with one foot in what you don't know. Actually, any real development starts with disequilibrium. If there is complete homeostasis, nothing happens.
And that's very central to Gestalt, as you then later developed that. So you were one of the first to prize this disequilibrium as part of the therapy, to bring it right into the work.
Yeah. And to develop the kind of support that will facilitate the standing the kind of unease and awkwardness.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, a young child has no difficulty with it. It's always wobbly, learning to walk and learning to talk. But there is so much excitement and so much interest and curiosity that the child gets over that.
And you think that's true all through life for all of us, even at our ages?
Yeah.
What is support for you? I know some of it's in the body, it's standing and breathing and
Yeah, the whole primary physiology. But then everything that one has learned during a lifetime and that really has become assimilated and integrated so that it becomes you. In the end, you don't even know anymore where you got it from. See, it's like, in a way, with food. When you really have chewed it and digested it and assimilated it, it becomes your flesh and bone and blood. And you are not aware of it anymore. It's you.
I'm thinking, as you said, that Gestalt is so often misunderstood as being
Gestalt
only the
is
present
not
moment. With
it's not a technical modality.
Yeah.
Well, of course, it's nonsense to say that the past doesn't exist. The past always exists as your total life experience, as memory, as nostalgia, as resentment. And the future is always there in planning, in hoping, looking forward to or dreading. But both remembering or anticipating is always taking place at a present moment. I'm remembering something now.
Which is the past, but in the present.
In the present. And of course, when memories come up through dreams or fantasies, then we bring them right into the present and in a way relive them in the present.
I think Gestalt's also misunderstood as if you complete, let's say, resentment. If you complete an unfinished situation, you're free, therefore, to live in the present. What I hear you say is the past is always with us. We live with it.
We can finish the resentment, which prevents us now from really coming to grips what is important now. We can finish the mourning. It means then giving up something. Letting go of something.
Does that happen with time, or is that your feeling that sometimes techniques help speed it, awareness techniques, but sometimes that's just a technique?
That's right. Techniques
What's
are
the feeling?
secondary.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Gestalt is a philosophical aesthetic framework, and within that frame you can use nearly any technique
Yeah.
which you are familiar with. You can use, you know how to use, or you can invent it at
Yes.
the moment. It's necessary.
And I know how you feel, but you've said about Gestalt being thought to be a collection of hot seat of techniques.
This is a narrowing down to a technique, to an approach that Fritz used in his last few years, and used very sensitively and very interestingly. And it's a wonderful demonstration method. But you can really use it only with people who are comparatively well functioning.
Mm.
He did it with professional people who have had their own therapies or analysis, and who are working with people already for years. But you can't use it, or only sparingly, with really disturbed people. And with really very sick people, you can't use it at all.
Mm.
And some Gestalt therapists don't use it altogether. And I think the ones who are only using it and nothing else, they don't really understand the whole principle of Gestalt.
There's different. There's East Coast Gestalt and West Coast Gestalt, and where do you see it? It is now.
Well, that was something, you know, that started in the 60s with the hippie movement, and at that time Fritz was out on the West Coast and somehow was taken in by that very much, and set off something which he really hadn't bargained for. It was this whole anti-intellectual attitude. Actually, what he meant by bullshitting is really a kind of intellectualizing,
Mm-hmm.
which does not mean that you shouldn't use your intellect. Actually, that's your foremost human equipment.
Mm. Did he mean that too, or that's your
That's mine.
feeling? Yeah. My experience of the Institute here was very philosophical. My experience of most of California is not so much.
Yeah, that is changing too. In San Francisco, it's not so much. In Los Angeles Institute is more grounded. But Fritz worked there for a number of years, and Simkin was there over 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And Fritz was in Esalen, it wasn't good for him. And before that in San Francisco, I think it was detrimental not only for him but really for Gestalt therapy at the time. Simkin said it himself, that Fritz started it and nearly ruined it.
So now what then? It's got some of that commercial because of the books and the films.
Yeah,
So now
yeah. Actually, my work in the last 10-20 years has been mostly to counteract that kind of
so now
hui approach, and to get it more rounded.
My experience with you was like that, which I loved very much. It was very slow and precise, not at all for big drama or quick.
That's right.
If you...
Well, Fritz was a theater person.
Yeah.
That's what he originally came from. That he did long before he got into medicine or psychiatry, let alone analysis.
And Hot Seat came from, some of those were theater techniques.
Yeah.
Used.
Some people thought that he got some of the technique from Moreno, but that wasn't so.
Oh,
He
yeah.
had very little contact with Moreno. It came directly from the theater.
Mm-hmm.
And Fritz wanted to be a theater director, and he was.
Which he did in the groups. But you or he, there's much of what you do that's very like, we used to talk about Eastern Zen.
Yeah.
And I know Fritz studied Zen, especially awareness.
Yeah.
Was that
Well,
taking
that
in
was
of the
actually
Zen
an
then?
influence on us already when we were very young in Germany after the war, the First War. We were very much steeped in Indian philosophy and poetry. And body techniques. Actually, the work I was doing in Eurythmics and modern dance, that was actually the school that my teachers came from, that was associated with Rudolf Steiner, and he was very much grounded in Western, in Eastern approaches.
Did you meet Steiner?
Nein. But I had an old friend who died a few weeks ago, who was a disciple of Steiner's and actually continued his work and has been writing a lot of philosophical works. It was somebody I went to school with, to the gymnasium, who was also very musical, and we played four hands. We were playing four hands in the school orchestra, and we were somehow the supports of the orchestra.
Did you run across Laban or his work then?
Oh yes, Laban and Mary Wigman. These were the ones we admired.
He was in 1915, even
Yeah,
later,
yeah.
all the way up to the 30s when they left also. Did you see his company? Did you see
Oh,
him
yes.
dance? Yeah.
I saw Laban and Wigman a lot.
Did that influence your work?
The expressiveness of it, yes.
Yeah.
Actually, in the school I worked with, we did a lot of group work also. Dancing. And a lot of work with nearly juggling with wooden balls and kind of acrobatic work, really.
In the gymnasium as part of your training?
Kind of things with kind of heavy wooden balls and throwing them and catching them and really getting into the movement with it.
They taught that differently than we teach gym now. They had awareness of the whole range
Yeah.
of motion and the
Yeah.
shape.
Yeah.
They taught the children to be aware of the body movement.
Oh yeah. Well, actually, one became one with the ball somehow, and one had a kind of contact with it. So the ball then becomes a thou,
Aha!
as I would say, would put it now.
So it's loose, and you have to keep contact with it as it moves.
Yeah, and you also let it go and let it come.
And come back.
Yeah. Let's make a few minutes.
Okay. Well, I think our time is up. Really, thank you for saying all these things
Thank you.
again. Thank you, Laura.
I enjoyed it actually.
I'm glad. We'll
Okay.
both leave with.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Light, please. Ah, thank you.